Hi everyone, thank you for joining us. We will get started in just a moment. Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. We'll just give it one more minute for people to join and then we'll get started. Okay. Thank you for joining us for our first for Early Start Bright Future webinar for 2026. We heard from you in our interview survey quite clearly that behaviour was one of the issues that you're really struggling with. So we thought this would be the perfect place to start with our 2026 webinar series. I'll be co-presenting today with Rochelle Morgan, who's a preschool field officer from Wyndham City Council. But before we get started, we'd like to acknowledge that we're all joining today from Aboriginal land. I'm joining you from Wadawurrung country and pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. We recognise the continuing connection to land, sea, skies and waterway and acknowledge the importance of connection to culture and community for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. That sovereignty has never been ceded and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Just a few housekeeping points before we get started with the webinar today. So this session is being recorded and we have disabled your cameras and your microphones for the webinar. If you have bypassed this setting, please know that your image will be shared as part of the session recording. If you need help or support in turning off your camera, if it is on, please reach out to Pearl in the chat. He'll be able to assist you. And you will receive a copy of the slides from today's session, as well as some additional resources and reading to support your ongoing learning and practice. Today's session will focus on understanding behaviour from a child's perspective, and we hope that as a result of the session that you'll feel better equipped to talk with parents and caregivers about behavioural concerns and to work with the care team supporting the child to implement consistent behaviour support strategies across all environments that the child interacts, such as home and in early childhood education settings. As I said in the intro, I'm joined today by Rochelle Morgan, Wyndham City Council Preschool Field Officer. Rochelle has been working as a preschool field officer for 13 years. She's got a master's in special education, early intervention and learning difficulties strand, and has previously worked as an education advisor within the Department of Education's early intervention team. I think most of you will know me by now, but my name is Michelle and I lead the Centre's Early Start Bright Future program. I am a social worker and have worked with children and families for over 20 years across child protection, out-of-home care, and also family preservation and reunification response before joining the centre and looking at this work in the early years in more detail. So between us, we're going to take you through the session today and provide some perspectives from our work, both working directly with children and families, but also in that education space. So the main point we want you to keep at the forefront of your minds throughout the session is that when you are faced with behavioural challenges in your work, that behaviour is a form of communication, particularly for younger children who do not yet have access to the vocabulary needed to articulate their feelings and what's happening for them in situations where they're becoming overwhelmed, or to communicate what we can do as trusted adults to help support them in this moment. So all the behaviour that we observe is the child's way of communicating with us, and it's also important to acknowledge that all children are different and they're going to respond differently to different situations, and they're also going to have different triggers. But also, a child may react differently to different situations and scenarios based on a range of different factors, such as what might be happening for them at home, what they might have been exposed to in the lead up to when you've met with them, whether that's in an education space or in a home visit, such as experiences of family violence, if there's been a change in the child's care environment, and so on. So this session is not designed to replace the need for specialist behaviour support intervention, which is required for some children, but it is, I guess, there to help you and to give you some tools to work more openly with the child's care team and their caregivers to support the child and to gather information so that if you do need those specialist referrals, that you can provide really clear information about your observations of the child's behaviour in the particular context of the program or service that you work in. And this can sometimes help with the speed up the process with those external referrals as well. So in the positive behaviour template and the trigger tracker that we'll talk about in more detail later in the session, we're going to be talking about behaviours of concern using kind of two main terms. So we're talking about heightened behaviours, which can look like aggression, physical or verbal intensity, such as pushing, biting, flipping a table, yelling, screaming, crying, hyperactivity, those kinds of things. And so heightened behaviours by their nature are pretty easy to spot. They're often loud or disruptive, and they can be a safety concern for other children, for staff, and for the child themselves. So understanding how we might be able to predict when these behaviours are more likely to occur and be able to intervene or respond to the situation prior to the big escalation can really help improve safety for everyone. And then we have passive behaviours, so such as a child who might be very quiet or withdrawn, who is very careful or slow in their movements, or who actively avoids attention. So these behaviours can be much more difficult to spot, and often these children fly under the radar because they're less obvious, particularly in a busy classroom or household. Passive behaviours might be the child's way of coping with an overwhelming situation, or it might be something like a masking behaviour, such as where there might be a level of neurodivergence or developmental delay, or that there is a potential that it might be an indicator of some mental health concerns emerging for the child, or it could just be that child's way of coping, that they're feeling unsafe in the environment. So both types of behaviours are concerning and indicate that the child's needs are not being adequately met in that particular situation, or they're not feeling safe in the environment. And I'm sure you will have seen many examples of this in your work with children. So next time you're working with a child or a group of children, start thinking about the types of behaviour that you're observing and what these behaviours are trying to communicate. You will likely see a range of both positive and negative communication in the behaviours that you observe. So one framework for thinking about behavioural outbursts is the hand model of the brain, developed by Dr. Dan Siegel. For those of you watching the recording of this webinar, you may not be able to view the video in the recorded version of this session, but the link to the video has been provided in the webinar summary document. So the hand model of the brain is really important in helping us to understand behavioural outbursts or flipping your lid. And we do this as adults too. Hopefully, we're not flipping tables and resorting to physical violence, but we might snap or respond more harshly to an incident than we might normally would when our own regulation strategies haven't been effective in the situation. And put simply, you might see in your environment with a child that they've become overwhelmed with a particular situation and the stimuli around them or internal to them has become too much and their brain flips their lid. Rochelle, I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about the Coke bottle theory, which is kind of another theory of looking at this in action.
Absolutely, Michelle. So I heard a really nice analogy to explain this. So imagine the child's limbic system and central and autonomic nervous systems are like a Coke bottle. So every little thing that occurs prior to coming to the educators, coming to you for the day, has shaken that Coke bottle up just a little bit already. So, for example, pretend I was the child and I didn't want to get up this morning. Like mum needed me to get out the door so she could go to work, but I didn't want to get up at 6 o'clock or 6:30 or whatever time it might be. I didn't want to get up, so the Coke bottle is shaken a little bit. Then mum yelled at me this morning to say, hurry up when I was going to the car. So it's shaken a little bit more. Then when I hopped in the car, she gave me a yogurt pouch on the way to kinder or to childcare, and it was not my favourite flavour. Again, my Coke bottle's shaken that little bit more. I then come into the room and my best friend's not there. So it's shaken to the point that the Coke's now spurting out the top and I start to, well, I lose it and I start to cry. So it can be hard for us as educators in that moment to understand perhaps where that bigger reaction is coming from. So meanwhile, that Coke bottle's been shaken from the moment that I woke up. So I like that analogy, Michelle.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rochelle. And so it's really important for children to get support to be able to regulate their emotions and feelings back to a place where they no longer feel under threat and they can close that lid. And for most children, they do this through co-regulation. And as I said in the video, this can be doing some activities, it might be breathing exercises or multisensory activities to support the child and their nervous system to recover with the support of a trusted and familiar adult. And there are a whole range of activities that might be helpful for different children. So it's really important that we talk to children and their caregivers about what's going to work for each individual child. So this color-coded poster we thought might be useful just to have in the slide deck because you can print it out after the session and you might be able to put it up in your staff room or in your office just as a gentle reminder that the vast majority of behaviour that we see in young children is not intentional and it's the result of them feeling overwhelmed and unsafe. And they communicate this to us through their behaviour. So when you have a child who might be displaying behaviours of concern or flipping their lid, it's really helpful to try and identify what the triggers for the behaviour might be, which is why we created the trigger tracker. So the trigger tracker can be used to record incidents of behaviours of concern, whether they're heightened behaviours or passive behaviours. And when you download this after the session, you'll be able to add additional fields or change the time frames to meet the situation that you might be working in. So you might use this by, if the child's behaviours consistently present, such as in a heightened way, you might record a H against the particular trigger or what might be happening for the child at the time in the time frame so that you can track those, or you might use just a tick if you are really clear about what that behaviour might look like. So the criteria or the trigger for the behaviour might be really clear in the situation that you're working with, or it might seem that the particular behaviour has come out of nowhere, a little bit like Rochelle just talked about. And so what you can do is record that as an unknown, but that there's been an incident of behaviour. And then later in the day, you might be able to reflect on some of the things that might have been happening throughout the day. And the trigger might be a bit more clear. It might align with things like changes in routine, changes in staffing in an education setting, even changes in the weather or a shift in household dynamics are all things that might create that trigger for the child. And behaviours of concern present for a range of different reasons. And there is also a really broad spectrum of behaviours that are really normal for a child to display, which are age-appropriate explorations of their environment and of rules and boundaries. And most children will display behaviours such as breaking rules, refusing certain foods, activities, or clothing as a normal part of their childhood development, and as they explore their surroundings and understanding of the world. So, the presentation of complex or challenging behaviours in a child does not necessarily confirm things like disability or health issues. They could be a part of that normal childhood development, but if they're becoming problematic, then it's helpful to kind of track and explore the patterns in those behaviours. And similarly with passive behaviours. And where concerns persist, there are referral pathways available to specialist support and assessment services for children. And so this information can be really helpful in kind of making those referrals and giving some information about the context of the behaviour that you've observed. And there will be some behaviour that will present, on a spectrum. There'll be some low-level behaviour that might have a very low-level impact on the child or to others, through to areas which raise, quite significant concerns for the child's safety and the safety of others. So when using the trigger tracker, it's also helpful to consider if the child's developmental age aligns with their chronological age, as developmental differences might also impact on the child's behaviour, particularly in situations such as in education environments where the activities on offer might not be suited to the developmental age of the child. Rochelle, I wondered if you wanted to jump in.
Sure. Michelle and I were talking about that sometimes it can be really tricky when we're, working with a child with some challenging behaviours, where it's almost like all of the educators feel like they're constantly looking up and around. Sometimes that's almost like being a meerkat. We're always aware. So when we're actually thinking about tracking a particular child's behaviours, it's really useful just to have a plan in place about who's actually responsible for making and recording these observations across the day. And we talked about the benefit of taking turns, because it gives everybody that little moment of, taking a little bit of a breather, because sometimes these things can be quite tricky for us, even as educators. So I suggested to Michelle something so simple as, the old-fashioned, or not the old-fashioned, but they've been around a long time, I mean, the scrunchies that people use for their hair. Just one around your wrist can be helpful, to indicate that you're the person who's observing that child and recording their behaviours. And when you need to tap out, you're able to give that scrunchie and hand it over to another educator so they can take over the role of more closely observing the child's behaviour. So it means that everybody's able to have a little break from being focused on the child with the bigger behaviours. And they're also able to engage with the other children in the room and feeling confident that that child who's being observed for the tracker is being cared for. So also having the tracker easily accessible, like something like maybe on a clipboard, so it's really handy, will also help with the speed of recording in the moment. It can get thrown into the sandpit or anything like that. It's a lot easier having it on a clipboard, and it's able to be mobile. And in a home environment, the tracker might be on the fridge, or if the families want a little bit of privacy, if they have a few visitors, I've seen some families pop them inside the pantry for ease of access. Thanks, Michelle.
So while we're talking about in an education context, you might be working in a situation where you have a child who needs some additional support, but that you might also be working in a situation where you have a lot of casual staff or relief teachers that need to come into the room. Maybe that's to cover breaks and those kind of things. And so they might not be the best place to support the child back to a place of regulation if they have become unregulated. So it's really helpful to have a bit of a plan in place to support understanding of the child's behaviours, but also what that particular child needs to return to that place of regulation. So as you can see on the slide here, we've kind of mocked up a really basic support plan. And this helps us to identify a few different things. So it's got a picture of the child. We can see really clearly that this child, Jenna, is in the green group. She's got a green border around her photo, and we can see the days of the week that she's in and what the triggers for her behaviour usually are. And we've also got some response strategies that we know have worked to support Jenna. What this plan doesn't tell us is why these things are a trigger for Jenna, and we may not know the context right away, particularly if Jenna's new to our class this year, for example. But her behavioural triggers might be there for a range of reasons. So, for example, Jenna might be just really sensitive to auditory input. She really finds those loud noises quite overwhelming. Or she might have experiences of family violence where there's been emergency service attendants at her home and those kinds of things that she's found quite frightening. Or she may have experienced something like a natural disaster, such as a bushfire, where she's been again exposed to a lot of loud noises and traumatic experiences. So the reason for the triggers might not be clear initially, and we can help explore the context of those triggers with Jenna's caregivers over time, and that will help us to work out the best ways to support Jenna in the longer term and how we can best accommodate her needs. And we could explore, that over time, like with Jenna, but also with her caregivers. So for those of you who are educators who might be working in groups or in pairs, providing some group work, those kinds of things, as well, it's really helpful to understand what your colleagues' regulation strategies are and how you can communicate that with each other so that you also know in the moment if there is an issue, who is best placed both individually but also to meet Jenna's needs to be able to support her if there is an issue where she needs support. Because this can be really difficult, particularly in the dynamics of a really busy room or a really busy household. So that's something as well that's helpful to think about in advance. And I can certainly tell you the teams that I've worked in, the ones that have been most successful and the ones that were more enjoyable to be in were the ones where each individual in the team was connected, they knew how to support each other and when that was needed. But also thinking about group regulation activities can be really helpful to think about in advance. So if there's an incident that impacts on the whole group or family, having that kind of list already in your head of activities that you might start to help support everybody to either stay in that regulation mode or return back to that regulation mode. Rochelle, I might throw to you.
Thanks, Michelle. And I know the question you asked me was, did I have any good regulation or group regulation examples? And like, first of all, I'd always go to dimming the lights, putting the music on, some breathing exercises. But really where I notice the biggest difference in the services I go to, Michelle, is the educators who, before it gets to that point of needing a reset, they're the ones that make the proactive steps rather than the reactive ones. And what I mean by this, if they see the children, if they see that they're not engaged in the program, they'll actually help these children engage. So you might think about those children who are wandering and then they end up doing something that we don't desire as much because they're looking for something fun to do. And so what I mean by this, if they see the children aren't engaged, they help them. So there's been many times where I ask a team member to help me set up a space needed in order to engage some children. So for example, I was outside and there was lots of children wandering and some of the children were more introverted and really just needed a mat outside with some books to be able to engage and to sit down. And, you know, engaging them in something that was going to match their learning style. So remembering that we have lots of children who have different learning styles. And sometimes when I've noticed, you know, that some children aren't engaged and I'm looking at setting up a space and remembering I'm just visiting, I've had a lot of educators say when I ask them to help me to set up a space, they might say, oh, I'm just casual, or oh, I'm the student, or oh, I'm lunch cover. So my answer always to that is, oh, well, you know, we're responsible for the children right now. So I don't think anybody would mind if we, you know, help support their behaviour as it's beginning to escalate. So we have to help engage them in the program because it's all of our responsibility, and we need to be watching for the escalation of these behaviours. So one thing I'm also noticing is that we need to help teach the children. Obviously, it's age dependent, but even very young children can help reset the areas that they've engaged in so that then it's actually looking inviting for the next child to come along. And until that happens, we obviously as educators need to reset the space and try and teach the children to do this themselves. So Michelle, my biggest thoughts or my thoughts about engaging the children, really it's before behaviours get bigger, thinking about their learning styles, and also what age and stage that the children really are at developmentally. So making sure that even if you've got, say, 4-year-olds in the room, and maybe some of those 4-year-olds, like a child I saw yesterday, was probably operating at more of a 12-month-old level. So really thinking about what age are they developmentally and are they able to engage in my program? And if they're not, how can I do this?
Fantastic, thank you. So another framework that we can use that's helpful when we're thinking about triggers for behavioural outbursts or flipping the lid is the window of tolerance. And this has also been developed by Dr. Dan Siegel. So I'm going to play another short video now. Again, for those of you watching the recording, you'll need to access the link for this video in the webinar summary document. It does take a little minute for the sound to kick in, so don't be alarmed if you can't hear anything just yet. Right. So as you saw in the video, there are a lot of factors that are going to influence each individual's window of tolerance and whether that window is wide or narrow. And a bit like Rochelle said as well, the child's developmental capacity as well will impact on the depth of that window. And some of those triggers will be external to the environment or your service and maybe internal to the child. So there are things that are going to be in our control, and there's also going to be things that are outside of our control, such as the weather, that might impact on each individual's window of tolerance.
And when
Which,
you're, thank you. Sorry, Michelle, I thought you paused there. Apologies. When you're exploring the physical triggers in the environment, make sure you also think to explore from the child's perspective. So getting down on the floor, and seeing things from where they are, even physically, so from their point of view, can be really helpful. And just as a little side note, in addition to that, it's also reflecting a little on what I was mentioning before about engaging the children in the program while you're looking for the triggers in the environment. Also, being at that level and thinking about how the child could engage in the environment is also really beneficial. So sometimes I actually ask my teams to kneel with me and really look at particular experiences in their environment. And when they're doing that, we ask ourselves, or even think about maybe doing this in your own rooms. If I was a child, like what exactly, could I play with here? Like, how could I engage with this space? Or thinking about the triggers, like what is it about, this space that's really, if I was a child, like really putting yourself in their shoes and really unpacking that. So it's a great way to see if you're missing any opportunities for your children to be engaged more successfully in your program.
um, these reflective questions we've popped in the slide deck, which you can access after the session, might help you to explore some of the data that you've collected up until this point using the trigger tracker and looking for those physical triggers in your environment and based on the context that you might be working within. So we'll let you explore those after the session. But once we've gathered that data around what some of the triggers might be, there might be a range of things that we can change that might have a positive impact on the experience of the child or quick wins. So some of the things that might be quick wins in a family setting might include things like establishing a bit of a routine chart to help the child to understand the steps they need to take to do a particular activity. So that might be things like getting ready in the morning, or it might be about changing the words that we use when we're requesting the child to complete a particular activity or task. And it also might be about making some adjustments to our routine that might take the pressure off those really busy periods. So, for example, often the mornings are a really busy time in households. And so maybe part of we change the routine at night time to get out the clothes that we might be going to wear for the next day for everyone in the household and getting our shoes and popping them at the front door so that in the morning when we're in a rush, we might be being a bit behind, being a bit late, and we're trying to get out the door, we're not running around trying to find the missing shoe because with little people, there's always a missing shoe in my experience. Rochelle, do you want to talk about some of the examples that might be quick wins in a learning space?
Absolutely. So things like reorientating the tables and activities to avoid the sun glare at certain times of the day, adjusting the lighting if there's any dimmer switches or blinds, creating and displaying a visual schedule. It's really good to display the daily routine to create predictability for children. I know I love having my diary and knowing what the plan is for the day, so do the children. Creating a quiet corner or timeout space which remains visible but feels separate to the child. I was just talking to a teacher yesterday how she was saying she wouldn't be able to use a washing machine box in her classroom, but she might be able to use a hoop with some material coming down that she can still see through, so it feels closed in for the child. Having a variety of sensory items available for children. Might include things like earmuffs so they can block out some of the noise, some fidget toys that might help support some of the varied needs, sensory needs for the children. May also include some personal sensory items like sensory chews, which might be supplied by the caregivers. I know some of my services for some of the children who are biting certainly have purchased some of the oral chew necklaces themselves, or some little bands that the children can chew on their wrist, like a stretchy bracelet, are some of the favourite ones. Other things that would apply across multiple environments might include things like getting a squeaky fan fixed or a rattly gate, to remove the constant and unnecessary noise. Replacing different textures in the room that might be triggering, and optimizing a child's key interests into other activities they might find less desirable. Like I had a little boy yesterday who was not wanting to go into the book corner, but the mum showed us in the parent meeting he loved reading the food catalogues. So the teacher today is taking in some food catalogues for him from Coles, and he'll sit there for a long time, we're hoping. Over to you, Michelle.
Fantastic. I love that, Rochelle. Thank you for sharing those. So if you're a practitioner working directly with families, talking about behaviours of concern and triggers may be a really natural part of the work that you're doing with families. And it might be one of the goals that the family has set that they want to work with you on in your time together. But sometimes for educators or other practitioners who might be working with families, raising behavioural concerns with parents or caregivers can be a bit more tricky because it's not the day-to-day part of your work. And so parents and caregivers are a really strong ally, particularly when we're talking about guiding behaviour in a more positive direction, because what we're aiming for is consistency in our responses to the child's behaviour across all environments in which the child's participating or interacting in. So that includes home and in education and any other services. If they're, going to swimming lessons, we want there to be some consistency in the way that they are responded to. And so our approach to these conversations with parents and caregivers is really important in building a positive and collaborative partnership with the family. So building these positive and trusting relationships does sometimes take time, but it provides us with a really strong foundation for when we need to have those difficult conversations, whether that's about behaviours that we might be observing or emerging concerns that we're seeing or something else entirely. So try to build those relationships with parents and caregivers if it's not the direct part of your role early, so that if issues arrive, you've got a really strong relationship base to work with. And when we're seeking to raise our behavioural observations with the parent and caregiver, the biggest tip I can give you is make a mutually suitable time with the parent or caregiver to discuss, because this enables both you and them to be in the physical and mental place they need to be in to have this really crucial conversation. We want to be approaching conversations with curiosity. We want to explore the caregiver's experience with their child and how the child might do things like how they might self-regulate at home, if they've seen these issues or similar issues in different situations, such as with siblings or in the park, those kind of things. So we want to ask really curious questions. We want to invite them into that conversation. It's a bit like, I guess, going fishing, where our questions are kind of the bait and the cast that we're kind of, sending towards the caregiver. And what we want is we want them to be able to engage with that and share information with us so that we can bring them close to us into that conversation and also into the planning about what the next steps might be in terms of how we can better support their child. And we also want to frame our conversations in a really positive and non-judgmental way. And so sometimes the best way to do that is to be focused on what the observations are. It's not a direct criticism of the particular child. It's about these are the things that we've seen. These are the things that we might be able to change to help support. And we want to seek the caregiver's experience in those conversations to see whether they've tried these things, because after all, parents and caregivers are the expert in their child, and so we want to work together with them to make sure that the changes that we might be able to make are going to benefit the child. Um, and not improve things in one situation but not in another. So we might improve things in an education space, but we might make things worse at home. So we want to be really clear with the caregivers that as well. We want to have an open and ongoing conversation with them, not just a one-off conversation. You might find that some caregivers are reluctant to provide information, and this can occur for a range of reasons. Most commonly, it's fear. Particularly for families who are known to child protection or are currently involved with child protection, might be reluctant to share information about their child's behaviour and the difficulties in managing that for fear that it might be used against them or reported to child protection. So in this situation, we need to take a really slow approach to building that relationship and keep our lines of communication with the caregiver open. The other main reason I've seen families withhold information is out of concern that their child might be exited or excluded from from a particular service in an education setting, particularly for those families who may have experienced that before coming to your service. So maybe in a different service, they've had those experiences. So they might be reluctant to share that information initially. And I've also seen a lot of situations where families might pull back or disengage with one or multiple services that they might be working with because they feel like there's a whole bunch of professionals involved with them who are coming in and telling them what to do or are judging them. So again, this might be another reason why families seem a bit hesitant to share information because they're not sure what's going to happen next and how many tasks they're going to be allocated as a result of that sharing of information. So we want to make sure that we're building that positive relationship. We want to have open conversations with caregivers in an ongoing way and that they're really positively framed. So there's some examples here on the slide of some questions that you might be able to ask parents or caregivers, and you can explore those following the session, and you can adapt them to the particular context that you're working in. One of the things I guess that we want to make sure is that the questions are positively framed and they're not judgmental, but also that we're seeking consent from the parent or caregiver for actions that we might want to take. And this really helps in building that positive relationship because parents and caregivers are informed about the actions that we might want to take, even if we've got a consent form in place that allows us to share information with particular people. Letting the carer know that that's something you'd like to do and seeking their consent for that action helps them to really feel a part of that process. The next step that's really important, as I think we've kind of talked about it already, is seeking that ongoing feedback. And we want to seek that from everyone. So we want to seek feedback regularly from the caregiver, from professionals or the care team who's involved with the child, and also from the educators who might be working with them. And whilst we do that, we want to keep the child at the centre of those discussions because their needs are paramount to the work that we're all doing. And we want to have a collaborative case plan, I guess, in terms of how the different services might be working with the child and the family to achieve their goals. So sometimes that happens through care team meetings that allow us to kind of gather feedback about child and family goals, about the strategies that we might be looking at, so that we can align our interventions to target specific outcomes. And we talked about behaviour and the potential, for changes to respond to the way that we might be responding to the child's behaviour. And so seeking feedback about how that is going from everyone involved is really important in monitoring whether that strategy is working or not. But the goal is really supporting that positive behaviour change for the child, and it's about improving that child's experience across all the environments in which they interact. So these tools, we'll pop a link to them in the chat shortly, but these are some of the tools that you can explore after today's session that we're kind of talking about throughout the session. And they're also available on our Early Years Hub website in the Resources tab. So we've already talked a little bit about the trigger tracker in kind of step one of gathering observations and data about behaviour. And we've talked about kind of step two in the positive behaviour template, which is about raising observations or concerns with parents and caregivers. So now we're going to explore how we can use that information by using the positive behaviour template. So as we've discussed previously, behaviour is a form of communication for the child who may not have the words to describe what they're feeling or how to seek our support. And so when we are able to understand what the child is trying to communicate with us through their behaviour and how the behaviour serves the child, we can think about alternative ways to support that child to achieve the same result before they come to the point where they become overwhelmed and the behaviours occur or they flip their lid. So the information contained in the template, again, will provide some useful context if further referrals and specialist behaviour support intervention is required. So in developing this model, we've looked at the pyramid model, which for those of you who are educators, you might have been exposed to this in your training, because it's a common model that's used in the education space. And really what this model focuses on is the social and emotional development opportunities for the child, and that we want to be intervening at the earliest possible point. So for lots of children and families, they'll be being supported through these universal support systems. But as we've discussed, specialist intervention may be required for some children, and so this falls in these top two sections of the pyramid, so the targeted social and emotional supports and intensive intervention. So we also talked about when we were raising concerns with parents and caregivers, and before we moved on to the next steps, there are a couple of key points we just wanted to share with you before we move into the next stages of further information gathering and planning phases. And the first is a really simple definition of trauma-informed practice from Meager and Corcoran at the Wagtail Institute, who talks about trauma-informed practice in its simplest form being compassion in action. And it's something that I really like, the simplicity of. Sometimes we talk about trauma-informed practice and we can get wrapped up in what trauma is and those kind of things. But what we know is that a child-focused and trauma-informed approach to any work with children is going to benefit children as well. Rochelle, do you want to talk about the mindful image?
Sure. I really love this image, and it shows the difference between being full in our mind, so mindful, versus mindful. So see how the dog is really, just really focused on exactly what he's doing at that given moment in time, which is going for a walk with his owner under the sun past the trees. So I really think we can apply this to our approach to conversations with caregivers. So sometimes we may plan a whole list of things that we'd like to discuss with the family. I actually had 2 parent meetings yesterday morning with a teacher who did exactly this with me. We had a whole list of things that we wanted to talk about while we had that family with us. So, the most useful action we can take in regards to mindful versus mindful, just pop our notes to the side. So we really closed our notes up. We had our notes in a notebook, closed up next to us. And then actually we flipped them open to paper to say to the parents, would it be okay if we take notes while you talk? Asked permission to take notes. Come to think of it, we actually opened that notebook, Michelle. And so we've really listened first to what the caregiver has to say in the moment. So yesterday I did say to one of my teachers, I said, look, I know that there were times where I probably should have brought mum back a little bit, but she really needed to express some things. And I knew that unless we really heard mum in that moment, we were really mindful with mum, really present and really listening. You spoke, Michelle, about going fishing when we're talking to the families. So we were almost going fishing, looking for those hooks where mum would say something and we knew we'd be able to bring them in later and refer to, oh, before when you said, we're seeing the same thing at kinder. We totally agree with you. We're on the same page. We were listening for those hooks. And so we really heard that mum in the moment because she really wanted to say some things about her son, knowing her child best, again, what you referred to, Michelle, because no matter what, as long as we heard mum in that moment, We knew that she would then hear us. If we cut mum off and didn't let her say her piece, no matter what we said later, there is no way we would have had any action. So by taking that additional time with mum, the positive actions we were looking for, which was actually please come to kinder at 9 o'clock in the morning or so versus 11:30. We were really wanting the child there for the group time and the learning time in the morning at kinder, and some other things that we considered in the best interest of the child. They're now being actioned because we did take that time. So we want to be more like the dog in this picture, Michelle. Our focus is on the here and now of the conversation. So I think that that really helps us to work together and be on the same page with the goals that we're trying to achieve.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rochelle. So
Mhm.
moving on to step 3 of the template, which is about that further information gathering. And so whilst there are information sharing schemes available which enable, the sharing of information between certain professionals in particular circumstances, like I said earlier, best practice is really to seek consent from the caregiver prior to contacting those other professionals, even when you have the consent form in place, so that they're aware of the conversations that you might want to have and that they can be a part of those conversations if they'd like to be. Um, so in terms of gathering further information, so we want to talk with parents and caregivers. We want to understand what might have been happening for the child in terms of their early developmental history, how that's impacted on the behaviour, any other experiences they might have had, trauma or other ways, so that we can help to understand, and that helps us when we're exploring some of those contexts of the triggers that we were talking about before. And also if there are other professionals involved with the family or current interventions in place, so that again we can make sure that we align our practices so that we're not overwhelming the child or their family with a whole bunch of different interventions from different services. But it's also really important that we seek the child's views and we seek information from them and about them, about their strengths, so the things that they're really good at, like you heard in the video, those experiences of mastery are really important for widening that child's window of tolerance in places where they see success, but also the areas of interest, because that's going to help us when we're thinking about how we might be able to provide some alternative activities for a child. If we can align those with the child's interests, that's going to be really helpful. Existing regulation strategies, things that they like to do to help calm themselves down. Again, everyone will have a different regulation strategy or different things that they really like to do, and also similarly in those alternative activities. So step 4 then is what we've called a behaviour support meeting. You might not necessarily have to have a formal behaviour support meeting. You might already have a series of care teams in place, and so you can make the focus of one of those care team meetings talking about behaviour support. But once you've gathered the information, we recommend that you convene a meeting specifically to talk about behaviour and to start to plan about the best ways to support the child, and again to create that consistency for the child across the care team, which includes the child's parents or caregivers. For caregivers who maybe have a bit of distrust of the system or a bit resistant, inviting them to bring a support person with them can be really helpful, or a professional within the care team who they've got a really positive relationship with, who can advocate on their behalf if they're not able to do that by themselves, or to make sure that their points are clearly raised and considered by the care team. And we recommend that you have a chairperson for the meeting just to keep things on track, because we know, particularly in complex situations, we can get really bogged down in the things that aren't working or things that we feel others haven't done. And so having that person there whose sole job it is to make sure that we keep on track, but that we are being positive and that we're planning collaboratively about the best ways we can support the child is really important. And so really the goal of the meeting is to discuss the observations and the information that we've gathered and to start planning around how we might be able to better support this child in a different way so that we can guide those behaviours into a more positive direction. And you can find a suggested meeting agenda for those meetings in the Positive Behaviour Template Guide. And what we recommend is, particularly when you're working with children in this age group, that you're only working on one behaviour at a time. Otherwise, it can become quite overwhelming for the child. But in saying that, a warm, compassionate and trauma-informed response is always going to help children to feel safe and to help in that co-regulation space with children. But we really recommend that you look at the behaviours that you might be observing, prioritise them with the child and the caregivers in terms of how you might respond to them, in which order, and just work on one behaviour at a time. Rochelle, I wondered now whether you wanted to talk a little bit about the 1 to 5 communication tool that I know we've talked about a little bit in terms of how we might communicate with parents and caregivers, say in an education setting, give them some quick feedback around how the behaviour's gone without exposing the child to those maybe triggering conversations.
Absolutely. So, as you know, Michelle, I shared that as educators, we've all most likely been in the situation where we would really like to tell the family about what behaviours occurred that day with their child. And as a preschool field officer, I sometimes hear comments from the families about how they find it really disparaging when, they have challenging behaviours shared with them each time they pick up, or so it seems to them. So I once worked with a psychologist who did something really great. I loved what she did, Michelle, and it was where she would allocate a number to a certain behavior with a family. So, for example, the child I'm thinking of, he would actually headbang frequently. He even headbanged so hard, Michelle, that his forehead was lumpy. He'd headbang glass doors and all sorts of things. So that child's number 5 behavior was the headbanging. So they decided if he, let's call him Mitchell, if Mitchell headbanged, they could say, oh, we had number 5 today around lunchtime. So that way, when the family picked him up, or even when the family dropped him off, even the family could communicate clearer and the educators could communicate clearer about what his behaviour had been when the other party had not been there. So, for example, he was at a number 5 around lunchtime, and after you dropped him off, but he was around a 1 to 3 for the rest of the day. So that way we can communicate clearly how the child was during the day, yet the child isn't hearing the behaviours being reinforced. So the family also aren't hearing a lot of information that they can find challenging because they're also struggling with it sometimes themselves at the end of a long day. My team developed a tool that I shared with you, Michelle, that we use with our teachers sometimes. And we developed it with some of our teachers. And we actually decided on talking with the teaching team and the family about which behaviours are which number. But then, Michelle, you had to play around with it and came up with this communication plan that I think is really practical and a lot of the educators listening today could really love and could use. So Michelle has developed a communication plan where she's generalized some of the behaviours into a 1 to 5 chart, which you might be able to use in a similar way with some of your families with their agreement. Good work, Michelle.
Thanks, Rochelle. And we'll let you explore what some of those categories are, and you might be able to adapt that to the situations that you are working in as well. So now, as you move through the template, you'll see then we start to talk about the function of behaviour. And so this is often where we see most of the discussion happening in those behaviour support meetings is about exploring the child's behaviour when things are working well for them, but also when there might be challenging behaviours and kind of articulating the different elements to the behaviour that we might observe in those times. And this may be a positive or a negative function, and exploring some of the ways to provide the same function of the behaviour for the child but in a different way can be really important. So There are essentially four functions to behaviour, and this model was originally developed by B.F. Skinner, who's an American psychologist, and it's been adapted slightly over the years. But to summarise, I guess the four main functions of behaviour are sensory stimulation. So that might be where the behaviour provides sensory input for the child, such as rocking, tapping, head banging, like you shared in your example, Rochelle. It might be about escape or avoidance. So as a result of doing this particular behaviour, the child escapes or avoids doing a particular activity or task. They might be removed from the situation, or they might just not have to do that thing. So that's what that escape or avoidance function might look like. It might be about attention, so that's another function. So this can include attention from their peers or adults, and it might be a positive or a negative form of attention. So other kids might laugh, they might, they might be fearful, they might, get to spend some one-on-one time with a parent or an educator as a result of that particular behaviour. So that might be, yep. Rochelle, do you want to jump in?
Thanks, Michelle. Just to add, remember, it was okay for me to jump in if that's okay. One thing that we forgot to mention to one another, and I'm sure somebody probably would mention it to us in the chat, is of course we look at attention as also connection. So sorry, Michelle, I did forget to add that in there.
Yep.
So attention and connection we love thinking about as well. Thanks, Michelle.
Absolutely. And then that final function is access to tangibles. So again, that might look like when the child engages in a particular type of behaviour, they might gain access to preferred items, sensory tools, activities, maybe such as screen time, for example. And I know I've certainly seen that a lot, particularly in family-based work, that particular behaviours result in screen time to help settle, and so sometimes that can be even more of a trigger for those behaviours is seeking that tangible item that the child might be desiring. So the next section in the template really looks at safety and risk, and again this is likely to generate a fair bit of discussion, particularly around the child's behaviour when that might place themselves or others at risk of harm. And so again, as we're trying to understand the child's behaviour and what they're trying to communicate to us and what they need in that situation, so what that function of the behaviour is, we need to also be thinking around how do we keep that child safe, how do we keep ourselves safe, and how do we keep other people in the household or in the environment safe as well. So it can be really good to have some group discussion in your care team with the child's caregivers around some of the factors that might be really important for us and the way that we respond to the child, because we want to make sure that we respond to the behaviour rather than react to the behaviour. So looking at exploring things like immediate safety measures might need to be taken in which particular situations where the risk is high and who's best to do that support with the child and to help them co-regulate. And it doesn't mean getting up in the child's face necessarily, but it means being close by, the child knowing that you are there to support them when they are ready to do that. But also it might involve some activities that we might be able to use to help support co-regulation with the child to help them close their lid again. Again, we talked earlier about group regulation activities. So again, thinking about what those might be in different situations to support the whole group or the whole household. For example, Jenna, who we talked about earlier, who's might be overstimulated by noise, having a group regulation activity about singing a song might be a new trigger. So that activity might actually become another trigger for Jenna. So we might then send her back into that place where she feels overwhelmed quite quickly. So we want to, think about what the strategies might be in different scenarios. And we also want to think about how we can support the child to kind of be continue to be a part of, if it's in an education setting, be reintegrated back into that group activity and the activities for the day, or whether that's in a family environment with siblings. And I talked about it in the slide there as that rupture and repair work. So being able to support the child to rejoin the group or family, whatever that might be, after there's been an issue where maybe they've caused some damage, maybe they've flipped a table, for example, or they've made the peers or their siblings afraid. So being able to support that child to kind of repair some of those relationships in an age appropriate way is really helpful for them in being able to move forward. And again, overall goal is about supporting that child to have a better experience in those environments and to be able to be included in those environments in the way that they want to be, whether that's in a family environment or in a different environment. So now, hopefully, as a result of the discussion across the care team and with the child and their caregivers, we've got hopefully a clearer picture of the behaviours that we're really concerned about. And then we're going to try and prioritise those in terms of what is the most useful for the child at this point in time. And again, the caregivers' perspectives are going to be really important here in helping us to figure out what behaviours we want to work on first. And so that we can work out across the different services that might be involved, how our particular intervention is going to help support the action on that particular goal before we move on to another step. So again, thinking about, this is really just a bit of a visual, thinking about the second half of that template, we're looking at trying to match the function of the behaviour for the child with a redirection activity. So hopefully we know what the trigger is. We've made some adjustments to the environment for the child. We've looked at some redirection activities or alternative activities that the child might be able to do instead, or to avoid some of those external stimuli. And hopefully we're starting to see a positive response. And so a positive response might be that we're seeing less frequency in those behavioural concerns or the flipping of the lid, because we're now providing the child with that same function of the behaviour before they get to that point where they've become overwhelmed. And then we can start to explore, again, as a care team and in consultation with the child's caregivers, how we might start to slowly teach new skills and behaviours. So we might start by offering choices about the types of activities or the order of activities that might be appropriate for the environment that you are working in. So giving the child a choice allows them to kind of be in control of that new activity if that's something that has been a trigger for them in the past. And we also might be able to implement a stop and swap type approach. So, for example, we might have a child who has engaged in a particular activity, such as splashing water around the bathroom or in a water play area in an early learning setting. And so we might need to stop that activity, but we could offer them the opportunity potentially that they could splash water outside, either using a hose or a sprinkler. They might be able to water some plants, or they might even be able to get a little bucket of water and a paintbrush and do some painting on the concrete with water. I know one of my sons, that was his favourite activity in kindergarten. He still talks about it now. So we can offer that opportunity to have that sensory engagement with the water, but in a way that it's a bit more suitable to the environment that we might be working with. Another strategy that might be implemented could involve the development of a bit of a script that we can work on with the child using their language, so that they can decline a particular activity that they might find triggering and how they might be able to request something different. And this kind of work is going to take some time. Learning new behaviours takes a lot of practice. So positive reinforcement of attempts is going to be really important in creating success for the child, because we know that, trying to implement a new behaviour when the child's already dysregulated is likely only going to further escalate them. So we want to be able to do some of that practicing work when the child is in that calm place to help support them to be successful in that. And again, it is going to take time and practice. And one of the things that's really important is that we don't remove positive reinforcement of those attempts as a punishment. So as a group in our behaviour support meeting, we might develop a bit of a feedback script as well about how, as adults supporting the child, are going to give that feedback, so that again the child, that becomes a consistent thing, that they know how that's going to be responded to. And again, as we've talked about a couple of times, seeking feedback on how the process is going from the child and from the caregivers is really important, so that we can make changes. We don't want to stick with strategies that are not working or making things worse. So we want to be able to have those opportunities to check in, to seek that feedback, and to make some changes. And again, hopefully with some time, the child, you might see some positive responses to that kind of strategy, and you might see a real reduction of those particular behaviours. And so then you can go back to the care team and look at the priorities, check with the caregivers that their priorities remain the same, and start working on the next area of behaviour that we might want to work on. So, in terms of supporting children who display behaviours of concern, like I said, we know that this can be really challenging, and it's sometimes a slow process. There is no quick fix. I don't think Rochelle has a magic wand either. So, it is something that is going to take time, and so there are some things that we can keep in our minds that help us as professionals to support the child and their family, particularly when they're in their most vulnerable position, when they're feeling dysregulated and unsafe. So these are what I call the 3 Cs. So if you take nothing else away from this webinar, hopefully this stays with you. So 3 Cs are compassion, consistency, and communication. So when we talk about compassion, we want to talk about compassion in our views of children, particularly those where they have behaviours that challenge, because, we're acknowledging that they're feeling overwhelmed. Those behaviours are communicating that to us, or they're feeling unsafe in the environment. So we want to be really compassionate in our approach to those children. But we also want to be compassionate in our conversations with caregivers. They are spending far more time with this child than you potentially are, and so they might be really worn down by some of those behaviours as well, and really feeling like they've tried everything and nothing's worked. So we really want to have that compassionate lens when we're talking with parents and caregivers. We also want to be compassionate with ourselves as professionals, that we're not always going to get things right, and we're not all perfectly regulated all of the time ourselves. So we want to be kind to ourselves as well. In terms of consistency, we want to be consistent in our responses to these particular behaviours that we might be working with. So again, it doesn't mean that we have to stick to a strategy that's not working, but we want to make sure that the child learns to understand and predict what that response is going to look like. So they know, if I do A, B is going to happen, or that I can ask for, an alternative. And that's really important in helping build those skills for children. And then we've got communication. So that's communication with children, with their caregivers, but also with their care teams. All 3 are going to be really crucial to having success in supporting behaviour in a more positive direction. And so this sometimes can be, having those regular meetings, having those opportunities to provide and seek feedback from the different people involved, so the child, the caregivers, the other professionals that might be working with, but also communicating within your team. So for example, in that education setting where you've got multiple educators in the room, having the opportunity to have those discussions with your staffing group, maybe with someone like Rochelle, preschool field officer, who might be working with, or, with your line management in supporting some of those things. And we don't all have, an ever never-ending list of strategies that we might be able to use to support our child. So sometimes jumping in and getting that expert advice is really helpful. Rochelle.
Another thing to mention when you're having these conversations with your team, one thing that I find fascinating, Michelle, is when we talk with teams about the behaviours that they're observing with the child, it's amazing how many people across the team have, I guess, differences in how they personally feel about particular behaviours. So, for example, I know that a really high-pitched squeal would make me go, ooh, and would almost be like nails down a blackboard for me. Whereas, for somebody else, it does not worry them. So I've had teachers, when we've been talking about the chart that we referred to earlier, when we're looking at, those higher, more challenging behaviors, for example, running out the room, I've had teams say, or one person in a team, for example, say, oh, that doesn't worry me. Whereas that's like, terrible for another educator. So even talking as a team about, how do I personally get triggered by some of these behaviors is actually really important too, because not everybody views the behaviors in the same way.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's, really important in terms of, that team approach, particularly in an education setting where often we've got multiple educators or professionals in the room at the same time, and understanding each other and what you all need as well, and when you might be feeling a bit dysregulated, and so it might be a better time for me to jump in, to support the child in that particular situation. Again, this is just another kind of set of reflective questions that we thought might be helpful for you to have to reflect on after the session, if you're working through the template with a child that you might be working with, to be able to reflect on what you might need with your line management, whatever that might be, or with a parent, in terms of thinking about, has our thoughts about those particular behaviours changed by thinking about some of the frameworks and models we've talked about today, but also things like, do we have the resources that we need to be able to support the child, to help them communicate their needs, but also to help in that co-regulation space. So they're just, some suggested questions for you to have a think about as you move through the process. So you can access those in the slide deck following the session. This is kind of our last official kind of slide. So I guess I wanted to finish the session with this quote, and unfortunately I'm not sure who to credit it to, but I heard it many years ago when I was working with some really complex young people, and it stuck with me. And I think it aligns really well with the 3 C's as well, which is that children who need the most love will ask for it in the most unloving ways. So again, reinforcing that message that behaviour is a form of communication, and this child's behaviour is really telling us that they're not feeling safe or supported right now in this particular situation. And so our job as adults is to think about the ways that we can support them differently. So I wanted to pop that in there just as a nice way to kind of finish that, but just to remind us that behaviour is not intentional. Potentially in this age group, children are just feeling overwhelmed and they're not really sure how to tell us what they need, and so that's when we see those kinds of behaviours. So obviously we've got a QR code on the screen there, which is a bit of a feedback survey. We'd really love for you to take a couple of minutes to fill out the feedback survey to help us shape future sessions, but also to hear your feedback. And if there's other things, if you've got any questions or things like that, you can feel free to pop them in the chat, and we'll try and respond to them either now or in the webinar summary document. Or if there's particular resources that you need, we're happy to kind of for you to input those as well, but we'd really like to hear your feedback. But if there are any questions, I'll start having a bit of a look at the chat, because I haven't looked at that for the whole session. But yeah, if you've got any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat.
And Michelle, can I add one more while we're waiting for any questions? One thing that is really important to think about is when we're trying to modify a child's behaviour, expect it in the first instance to escalate. So a little boy, we're trying to get off his milk bottles. He's in a 3-year-old kinder program, still having milk bottles. We're trying to transition him to a sipper cup. Of course, he's going to really want his milk bottles for quite a while. So imagine that the behavior you're trying to change is going to escalate. So when you think, oh, this isn't working, keep going for a little while longer. So that consistency, one of the 3 C's, Michelle, is really key. So thanks for having me along today, Michelle.
Thank you for being here, Rochelle. I think it's really important that we can, talk and share experiences and from very different kind of perspectives and backgrounds. So I do want to thank you for your time. It's been excellent.
There's no questions so far.
It doesn't look like there are any, but like I said, if you do have any questions that you'd like us to answer, Nicole, we will send that 1 to 5 communication document with the webinar summary document email, which will include the recording to the webinar for you to have a look at, and you can think about how that might be useful in the work that you do. So we definitely will share that out with you. A few people are having trouble getting the survey to open. That is a challenge. I will pop, if you've got any other feedback and the survey is not working for you, I will pop my email address in the chat and you can email me directly if you are having trouble with that survey. If anyone needs to, and final slide is really just, contact details for the Early Start Bright Future team if you need to reach out to us, and obviously the Early Years Hub website, which includes a whole range of these resources, the behaviour support tools as well. So you can always access them anytime. But I think that's all the questions. So thank you so much for joining me, Narelle. And we've managed to come in with a few minutes to spare, which I'm a little bit surprised about because I know we're both very passionate about this work and supporting children. So it's been a great session. So thank you so much for joining me. And thank you everyone for joining us. We hope it's been helpful and we'll see you hopefully in the next webinar.
Bye.
Thanks, Rochelle.